The images of the wind, quote, wind blowing through the wet wheat and, quote, helping the cow in labor are tangible and real, unromantic by any means. Yet the imagery associated with the woman's desire is ideal and romantic, unset by any concreteness and wholly characterized by their, quote, head in the clouds quality. Indeed, she didn't want this tangibility of her goals, this, quote, blood intimacy. Her pursuits are described by Lawrence as, quote, beyond and desiring of the, quote, active scope of man. To her, the city beyond the mundaneness of the farm was a, quote, magic land. By contrast, these imageries are much more ethereal. They lack any real concrete evidence of their existence and the mere romantic romantic conceptions, thereby illustrating the woman's unsatiated thirst. Her perspective is outward and extrinsic as she, quote, sets out to discover what was beyond range and freedom. This contrast only highlights the woman's desire for liberation. So one thing that's really good in this paragraph that you might want to emulate is that the author uses a lot of small quotations. Instead of banking a giant quotation in the middle of the paragraph, we use little bits and pieces here and there to prove points without overwhelming your reader at any point. And that's great. That's a good way to use quotations. They're using them well. They're also using elevated vocabulary well here. Furthermore, the omniscient narrator, hey, that's a good little term got in there, uses rhetorical question to emphasize one little critique. They put rhetorical question first in the thesis. They have it second in the body paragraph order. I would have inversed those if I had time as a writer. You want the devices to show up in the order you're going to talk about them in your paragraphs. Furthermore, the omniscient narrator uses rhetorical question to emphasize this yearning quality of the woman's situation. As she ponders the differences between the city man, that is the vicar, and the inward-looking Brangwens, she begins to question the qualities of the vicar that made him superior to other men. And she pondered, what was it? ? What power had the vicar over Tom Brangwen? ? The yearning of her desire to understand ultimately leads her to conclude that in physical stature there was no supreme being, yet the secret of the vicar's, quote, strength lies in his learnedness, his knowledge. The woman's persistence and burgeoning desperation, ooh, good language, to understand are characterized by the presence of the rhetorical questions, which are simply the narrator's vocalization of the woman's true desire to, quote, know, as she looked out from the front of the house to the unknown, quote, magic land before her. Lawrence also uses repetition in order to underscore the individuality of the woman's situation, suggesting the subsequent quest for independence and liberation. The use of anaphora in, quote, she craved when discussing the woman's yearning character and her seeking knowledge highlights the woman's persistence. I don't know if I buy that. Another resonating characteristic of the repeated, quote, she is that it is singular, suggesting a feeling of solitary desire as opposed for mutual sentiments. Never does Lawrence associate the woman with the husband as a we. I think that's an interesting observation and a pretty clear one. I wasn't buying this paragraph, but the idea that she's always she and not we, and the Brangwen men is plural, but she is singular, that liberation, that knowledge is an individual pursuit rather than a communal one. I think that's interesting. I buy it. I think the authors or the students done a really good job here. The singularity of her quest for liberation and the contrast between the woman's perspective and that of the men are emphasized by the use of the singular she. Here's a conclusion. Ultimately, Lawrence suggests that the woman's situation revolves around the existential desire for the unknown and the unquenched thirst for knowledge of what lies beyond her comfort. The use of repetition, rhetorical questions, and contrasting imagery serve to perpetuate the woman's yearning and wistful qualities. I don't love the conclusion. There's nothing bigger. There's nothing more thematic about humanity in general, but it's fine. I don't think the essay's a 6 on our 6-point rubric. It's probably a 5, but it's a solid essay. There's a lot of good stuff going on there. Elevated vocabulary, some good observations. Not a great thesis, but it's there. Let's look at number 2. This one is 3 pages, so I'm already like, hey, I'll see if they do as good a job as the last one. Handwriting's better. You can't go wrong with better handwriting. Actually, pause before I get into this. Handwriting is not an indication of a good essay. If you take too long in your handwriting, it reduces the amount that you can write. You need your handwriting to be legible. If they can't read it, they won't grade it. But it doesn't need to be beautiful. It doesn't need to be perfect. You can have scratch marks. You can cross things out. You can do pre-orders. As long as it's clear what you're trying to do, and as long as they can read your handwriting, you're good to go. So don't spend your time. Don't waste your time trying to make your handwriting perfect. Now, you can also type these, so you should be able to type them, but you can handwrite them as well and then take pictures and upload the pictures. So whatever works for you, whatever you're faster at, you may want to time yourself and figure out which is preferable. But let's look at a second essay written by a student here. D.H. Lawrence portrays the woman of the novel The Rainbow as a woman who wants more in life than what she's lived through. Okay. The author characterizes her as a farm woman who is intrigued and consumed by the idea of life outside rural England. Okay. Ultimately, she appears as if she longs to leave, almost as if she's been confined and imprisoned. Lawrence is able to develop this character in such a limited and short passage of his novel through the contrasting diction and seamless switch of narration when comparing the men to the women and when comparing the vicar to her husband. Okay, so it's a little repetitive at the beginning. It does tell you that the woman is wanting more in life, that she feels trapped in her home, and that we're going to be looking at contrasts or juxtapositions between the woman and the man and the woman and the vicar and the husband. All those are good. I think the author is showing a clear understanding of what's going on. There's no thematic element. There's nothing bigger than, hey, look, we developed a character. But that's not nothing. To say, hey, I understood the excerpt. I understand what Lawrence is doing. That's not nothing, and if that's all you get, then run with it. This author, this student's doing that, and not badly so far. The men are happy and perfectly content with their situations. They lived, quote, full and surcharged, and they had much, quote, exchange and interchange with the nature surrounding them. However, the woman merely, quote, wanted another form of life. In describing the men surrounding, Lawrence uses intimate details, making use of very detailed diction, such as, I don't like detailed before diction. I think it'd be better to, say, like we looked at that sexual diction at the beginning, you could use that. Something that's detailed it's a nothing word. It doesn't really say anything. Such as, quote, set the young ears of corn wheeling freshly around them. What good does that quote do? Thus, although the narration is in the third person, it is not objective in any fashion. The narration appears to be focalized. Focalized, in that it describes the men's situation in a personal, intimate way. Okay, I like the word intimate there. The reader can imagine that the men would describe their life just as how the narration portrayed it. All right, we're losing this one. It started out pretty good, but I feel like they're starting to stretch a little bit. Hopefully we get into the woman and it's got something more to say to me. In the second paragraph, the narrator switches with the abrupt usage of the word but to emphasize the change that's going to follow. All right, that's keen. That's a good observation to see that word but and know we've got a juxtaposition right off the bat. We haven't used that word yet, but I like that. The diction used to describe the woman's desires is very vague and broad. All right, that's clear too, as opposed to very detailed. We got vague and broad. I like that. The unintimate diction is understandable because the woman wants another life that she hasn't experienced. The woman is extremely distant from the, quote, cities and governments and the active scope of man, the magic land to her, where secrets were made known and desires fulfilled. However, the broad diction does not imply that the narration became object. The narration became focalized, they're killing me, on the woman, but focused. Focused is the word, people, focused. But it appears less personal because her wants and desires aren't attached to her reality. Again, that's a great idea, that she can't be as detailed because she doesn't know what she wants. She hasn't got the knowledge. That's great. So this is a very difficult essay for a reader to grade because it has moments of brilliance, but it also has focalized. Where was I? Her wants and desires aren't attached to her reality. The vagueness is a direct reflection of her detachment and disinterest in the rural lifestyle. Therefore, the narration of the first paragraph cannot be seen as positive, and that of the second paragraph cannot be seen as negative, or vice versa. They're both reflective of the feelings and attitudes of the characters they're describing. I don't know that that makes a point that's worth making. The diction, as a result of the narration, is reflective of the fact that, quote, the Brangwen men faced inwards, and the woman looked outwards and beyond. All right, final page. The diction then heavily contrasts. Pause. Heavily contrasts. Don't use adverbs. Adverbs are a waste of time. If it contrasts, it contrasts. It doesn't heavily contrast. There's no weight on the contrast. The diction then contrasts in the fourth paragraph. In the fourth, the narration is more focused on the woman's thoughts regarding the differences between the vicar and her husband. The diction in the first part of the passage is used to emphasize the different perspectives on lifestyle in rural England. However, the diction in the last paragraph is used to highlight the differences in these men. The woman's husband, in comparison to the vicar, is dull and local, whereas the vicar is dark and dry. Although the vicar is smaller than her husband, he holds power over him, whereas her husband simply holds power over cattle. The point of this contrast is to further light on the woman's desires. She idolizes the vicar and portrays her husband in a negative light, thus demonstrating that she, quote, craved to achieve this higher being, end quote, and the essay just ends there. It did some things well. It really did. There's some good clues and indications that you've got a very thoughtful writer, a perceptive writer. I think this would score on the new rubric a 3. It does some things that might push it into a 4 range. If it's a 4, it's a low 4. If it's a 3, it's a high 3. That's where I'm going to put this thing if I'm grading it on the modern rubric. All right, one last essay, and then we can tie this series of YouTube videos up, and hopefully, send you off to write your own, and think about these 3 essays. Go ahead and give them a read, give them a careful read, and think about how they were organized, what the structural tendencies were, how the one that was really functional was in comparison to the second one that we read. This third one is 2 pages long, so I do not have high hopes. But we'll read it, and we'll see what the author said. But you can see that, and then we'll look at how they were graded. Remember, these were all graded on the 9-point scale, back when they had the 9 points. And I'm grading them on the 6-point scale, just reading them here. But here we go. In D.H. Lawrence's novel, The Rainbow, the characterization of the woman is strongly pronounced by literary devices and techniques. That's a statement that says nothing. What literary devices? What techniques? Why is it strong? Lawrence uses an order and a juxtaposition of males and females to extricate their differences. Extricate's not a word. A repetition of certain words and phrases. What words? Don't use things like certain words and phrases. It tells nothing to the reader. I do like that they use juxtaposition. It's the only essay to do that. A repetition of certain words and phrases is also used by the author to further stress the roles assigned to the specific sexes, further differentiating them from each other. What roles assigned to which sexes? I mean, again, they're vague booking me here. Like, what is the characterization of the woman? How is it strongly pronounced? What literary devices? What words and phrases? How are the roles different? Like, they're saying things, but the things don't have any meaning. So, already we've read the introductory paragraph, and I'm like, in D.H. Lawrence's first paragraph, he discusses the role men play in society. Okay. He describes them as creatures content with their lives and particularly content with their knowledge. Okay, I buy that. Lawrence constantly repeats the phrase, quote, enough when talking about men in the first paragraph. Quote, enough